would love to start with a question that caused a bit of a buzz in the first half of the day, which was around, are we wasting our time if we are testing and we're receiving the information late and we're not doing anything with the information and the data that we receive? So maybe we can start with that question. And I'll hand it over to ZU because you have a national perspective. Are states doing anything with the information they get from assessments? What could they be doing better, and where does Ohio fall?
Thanks, Jenny. So I have to apologize in advance because this is not the news that we are hoping to get, which is, across the board, we find that states haven't really been leveraging the school accountability systems and the data that the system produced to drive resources to low-performing schools. So at All4Ed, we have been doing a lot of research and advocacy work around state implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, which is the most important federal law on K-12, public K-12 education in the country. And under ESSA, states are required to set up their own school accountability systems in order to identify the lowest performing schools in the state. However, we are wondering whether school accountability results would actually impact school spending in the state. So in the report that we published in February, we compared school level per pupil spending in 2018-19 school year, which is the year when schools were first identified for needing support, compared to the following school year. And what we found is that across the board, states haven't, like I said, states haven't been really leveraging the data that they have and the school identification results to direct more resources and support to those lowest performing schools in their states. So in Ohio specifically, we found that more than a third of identified schools actually spent less per pupil in the school year following their identification. So that means that these low-performing schools did not really have the capacity, support, and finances to really implement evidence-based strategies or what you have to turn themselves around and to improve student outcomes. And, it is very obvious, according to our research, that funding for school improvement at both federal and state local level isn't sufficient enough to support all identified schools. And on the federal side, at least there's the 7% Title I set aside, which is only available to identified schools. But that money is by no means sufficient to support all schools, because we know at the end of the day, over 90% of public education funding come from state and local governments. So really, it's a really missed opportunity for state and local policymakers to not have any type of dedicated funding to support low-performing schools. And we think, it is a missed opportunity, and at the same time, it is never too late to take actions and make school support as a priority at the local and state level.
Thank you, Ziyu. And so we have the national picture and where Ohio falls, and I would love to hear from Stephanie, because you're in district executive leadership now, but you were also an educator and a principal. What's your take on the data that is produced from these assessments? Are we actually using it to create improvement?
Well, my perspective is a little bit different. So we also know at a school district level, we all know about the infamous formula, but we also know that the money travels with a student and parents have choices. And so when a student moves out of the public school system and goes to a charter school, that money then follows to the charter school. And unfortunately, that money goes to the charter school, and then so the school districts and the public schools then suffer. So like Lorain City Schools, which is a part of the mid-sized Urban 8, which is a large school district in per se, when we see that our school district might have had 8,000 students and now our school district is now down to 6,200 students, then that means that we've had a significant loss in the student size population. That means that a lot of students have now gone to a charter school system. That means a lot of the funding has now gone to a charter school system. So we are paying attention. And so now we have to be innovative and creative of how we're going to get the students back, the families back, in order to increase the size, in order for us to get the funding back to where we need to get it to.
Thank you. And last but not least, Zoe, I think we're all curious to know your perspective taking these assessments not so long ago, and also, maybe you can share more about the work you're doing to make assessments and the data that we get from them more meaningful for students.
Yeah, we actually just led a breakout with a lot of students from Ohio where we talked about this very question, and I think it was a little disheartening because it seems like high school students are having the very same experiences that I was having, where you're taking these exams, you don't see them for 3 to 4, maybe 5 months. And when you get them back, you get this slip of paper and your instinct is to crumple it up and shove it in your backpack because all the other students are getting the same sheet of paper and everyone's asking questions like, oh, how did you do on this? How did you do on that? Who got the perfect score on this? And that's something that I think ran through my entire high school experience. In particular, the one story that really comes to mind is we all had to take the ACT our junior year of high school. And so we all get our individual slips back and our teacher says there were 3 students in the class who got a perfect score. And everyone is running around trying to figure out who are these students who got a 36. And that's the environment that students have around assessment, is how did I do and how do I do compared to other people and how do I get better? How do I supersede my classmates? Not how can I work with them? How can we grow and how can we support each other? And I think that's what students are seeing with assessments. It's creating competition, which isn't actually helping students grow, and it's not helping schools improve either.
Shifting. We can shift. How do we make these results more meaningful, and how can we make that process of assessment better?
Yeah, I think democratizing the process. So students spend so many instructional days taking these exams, but we don't really get a say in how those exams and assessments are being designed. What kind of data do we really want to see coming back? And actually, I brought up an example. We worked with a high school in Frankfort, Kentucky, to help them do that. So they got to design the questions that they wanted to ask about what should assessment and school accountability look like? What do we want our school to be measuring? They designed those questions, did the surveys and roundtables themselves, analyzed that data, and then got to present that directly back to students. So even when we're having these conversations about assessments, oftentimes that's only being done with teachers and administrators, and students don't actually get to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And so I think just democratizing that process, making it faster so that teachers and stakeholders can respond quickly and in the moment, I think is how we make those assessments more meaningful.
Thank you. And can you share maybe an example or two of what the types of questions and the types of things that students want to be asked?
Yeah. Here, I'll try to find something in here. I think the big one from this is, this report I think is about 16, 17 pages, and more than half of it is about school climate. We're not even asking students, like, what are you actually learning in the classroom? How do you feel about tests? A lot of it is just, are you excited to come to class in the morning? How do you feel being around your peers? Do you feel like people are going to check in on you if you come into a classroom crying? And these are metrics of school accountability that we don't measure on our standardized exams, but are equally, if not more important to how we're developing students as human beings.
So maybe let's stick to this question around school culture, school climate, and all of the enabling conditions. I think we all know this to be true, but it bears repeating, right? A student can't do well on assessments if they're not learning. They can't learn. They're hungry if they don't feel safe, if they don't have the basic resources that they need. So this is a perfect question for you as you lead the work around wraparound services at Lorain. What does that look like in your district? How do you make sure the resources are getting to the students that need it most?
So one of the things is wraparound services came about because of Dr. Graham, who is our visionary as our superintendent, knew that when we came back from COVID, as many school districts knew, Zoom opened up a lot of people's eyes, right? And so we were able to look into families' homes at that time. And we knew when we came back into school that we saw a lot of things. So we knew that we needed some things. But we also did some surveys of families and students. One of the things that we saw in the surveys were we knew that we had some food deserts in our city population. So we knew that we needed to provide some resources for food. We knew that medical care was one of our biggest things because we provided medical services for many of our families because we were the primary medical services. And so when they came back to school, we needed to provide that. We also knew that we needed to provide clothing for some of our families because they didn't have the needs or the resources. So there was a couple of things that we instituted. We got 5 school buses, and we partnered with a company called MOS, Mobile Outreach Solutions. We gutted them out and we outfitted them, one, to make a medical clinic out of it. One has 2 doctors' offices or clinics on either side and a medical office in the middle. So someone can go and see our nurse practitioner on it and see them, and it goes throughout Lorain County and provide medical services. But we also have a standalone medical clinic housed in one of our elementary schools. The other one is for dental. One is for vision. We also partner with Second Harvest Food Bank, where we have every month we provide food pantry. Twice a month, one at Lorain High School, one at Longfellow Middle School, but also we've outfitted another bus that can go throughout Lorain County to service our families, but also to service our seniors in order to get food to them. The other one is for vision, and the other one is going to be for dental. Again, fitting the needs that we don't have for our families because that's what they need. We also found out that we have a high rising homeless population. We have a lot of students that are what we call couch surfing. They don't necessarily have an adult that is watching them, but they are living with other family members or they're living with other friends. And that population is around 15% or more. And so that is a large population. We also found we have a lot of unaccompanied youth, which are not teenagers, but smaller students that are here from, they might be here from a different population, or they're just not here with their parents. And so, again, that's a large population, which is another 15%. So we're looking at about 30% of a homeless student population, which is quite large for an urban school district. So again, these are some of the resources that these are some things that we found as we're coming back from COVID, and that's what we're looking at for wraparound services.
Thank you for sharing. So sticking on, we talked about services. Maybe let's go back to culture. We heard a lot this morning about people experiencing bias, racial bias, linguistic bias, cultural bias in school, in the curriculum. So I'd love to kick it back to Zoe to maybe share, what her experience has been and what your work has looked like to improve, cultural competence at the school level.
Yeah, I think I'll just uplift an example from our roundtables this morning. Things as simple as just the questions that you're asking. So we had a student who brought up, you're reading a math problem and they're talking about canoeing. He's like, I've never canoed before. That's already a barrier for that student. I think, and it's a small example and it might seem like a micro example, but I think that's true for a lot of students, that they're reading questions about people, about scenarios, books and texts that are not relevant to their experience. And that's just another barrier you have to jump over before you can understand the content of the question you're asking. But also, I think more importantly than just those small things. It's just the purpose of these assessments themselves. And are we connecting assessments with what actually matters to students? So we want students to do well on things that are important to them. And we're really good at we want students to do well. Like, you want students to get the maximum score on every single assessment. We want them to meet the proficiency level and all these different things. But we're missing the what's important to them. Is this actually relevant to the career they want to have? Is this relevant to the backgrounds that they've experienced? Or are we just pushing them to excel in 100% of everything? Which isn't, it's not realistic for every student and not realistic for most students. And it's not meaningful. That's not purpose-driven learning. And so I think that's been a lot of my own experience of feeling pushed to excel in every single thing you do without taking a minute to think, do I actually like math and science? Or am I just doing this because my teacher said, I think you could do a really good job at this, and we need you to do a good job at this so we can beat this other high school and test scores this year.
Yeah. So I think we've painted somewhat of a picture of this ideal vision of what a school should look like, where there is meaning, where there's cultural competence, where there are wraparound supports. Now we come back to this question posed by Eric at the beginning of the day, which was, what schools do we measure, right? How do you measure if a school is doing all those things? Can be a challenging question. So I want to kick it back to ZU and talk about, like, how do we currently measure school quality? There are obvious limitations there, but it doesn't mean that there's not something we can do that's best practice. So, why don't you share your perspective on?
Yeah, sure. For as accountability purposes, states actually have quite a lot of autonomy in terms of how they can measure school quality and student success. They can determine, how much each component is valued in their systems, and they can decide what happens or what does not happen as a result of accountability, and identification. So I think it is really important, regardless of what measures a state chooses to measure, it is important to revisit and update the content and the methodology of the measures that they choose, because at the end of the day, they have to consider inputs from community members and practitioners, because they are the ones that are closest to the classroom and day-to-day operation in a school, and they are the ones that are most invested in the future of their community. So I would give one example that Ohio used to use a college and career readiness indicator called Prepare for Success. It was a really rigorous measure to measure students, preparedness for post-secondary opportunities, but it was really just criticized by local members of the communities because because they think that it is focusing too narrowly on college-ready options and is not giving enough credit to students who made the effort to pursue career-ready options. So during the redesign of Ohio's accountability system a few years ago, I think policymakers got community members, parents, teachers, students, and industry partners at the same table, and they worked out a new, updated version of the College Career Readiness Indicator. It's called, College Career Workforce and Military Readiness. They apparently didn't work on the name of this, but it's CCWMR as abbreviation, which is very hard to remember. But basically now it has 11 options. So it not only made the college-ready options more rigorous, they added a bunch of career-ready options so that students now can demonstrate their readiness through those equally rigorous career options. So, for example, now a student who is enlisted in the military or completed a work-based learning experience can be deemed as ready for this indicator. What I want to say is community input is really important, and your voice really matter. And even though you think that this is super high level policy making decisions, actually they want to know what you think, and they need to know, because if your voice isn't heard and the measure that the states put out is not working at the local and school level, then they're not getting the accountability result that works.
Thank you. And I will flag that part of the conversation this afternoon is going to take up this question of college and career readiness and high school graduation requirements in Ohio as a case study. So hold your opinions on it, because there's going to be time to discuss. I want to sort of end with a call to action if we can, because we have students in the room, we have families in the room, we have policy folks in the room, community stakeholders. What can and should stakeholders in this room do to push for improved learning and school quality? Where would you focus your time? And this is open to all of you, and feel free to jump in when you're so inspired.
Okay, I can start. I think my call to action would be to focus on authentic assessment. We want students to be ready for life, and so we need to be assessing them in a way that rewards them for being ready for life. I think when we did our large research project during the pandemic, coping with COVID, to see how students were managing with the pandemic, the constant theme that we heard is that there were students who were taking on so many more responsibilities at home. They were doing farm work, they were taking care of family, working extra jobs, and then they were being penalized on assessments because they didn't have time to do their homework. And we know that this is something that continues post-pandemic, that there are students who are really developing serious life-ready skills, but then are penalized on our standardized assessments. And they're probably more life-ready than the students who are cramming for these exams. And so how can we think about ways to authentically assess where students are and what competencies they hold, even if they don't fit into our frameworks of what we think should be typically assessed on a standardized exam?
And I would just reiterate what I just said. Make your voice heard is really important, whether it's on social media or whenever you have the opportunity to talk to people. It is important to get your voice out there. Back to your point on the life-ready skills, I remember last year I was talking to some of the policymakers in Vermont, and they actually made I forgot what the exact name it was, but life-ready skills as, they would count as credits. So for the time that a student's spending on taking care of their siblings or their parents, they would get credits for doing that. And that is such a, great way to recognize a student's experience, and everybody have different responsibilities in their life outside of school. And I think, it is because they heard what the people are saying and what the students are experiencing, and they listen and they change their policy.
I agree with both of these ladies. In our school district, we are currently using Panorama, which allows for us to listen to student voice in order to change adult behavior. But we also have done surveys in order to listen to what our parents are needing in order to change the behavior within the school district. In order to listen, sometimes as a district, we have to sit back and listen. A lot of times people make choices and they never listen to the people in which we serve. A school district, we serve the people, and sometimes people forget that. So you have to listen to whom you serve. We are in a great way in a school district. We are stewards of the people. And so listening to parental voice and listening to student voice are the greatest two voices that we can listen to. Thank you.
A hand for our panelists. We have some time for questions. There's a microphone in the middle. We have a good amount of time for questions, so please feel free.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dakarian Wimberly. I'm going into my junior year at Elyria High School, and I am a project-ready student at the Lorain County Urban League. My question is for Miss Stephanie Alexander Johnson. Since you work in a school district, Zoe mentioned something about students meaningful, making the assessments meaningful. So how would you go about making school and even the assessments more meaningful to the students so they would want to come to school and want to actually take the test and do well and not just shove it off to the side?
Shout out to Elyria Pioneers. I used to work there too. Thank you so much for your question. So I mentioned Panorama. So Panorama allows for student voice. One of the things that we found out was about student belonging. That survey told us our students said they did not feel like they belonged in our school district. That was an eye-opener. So as adults, we had to stop, we had to listen. That means that we have to change. That's an assessment. That means that we got to change the way we do things. That's important. Our superintendent, he has a superintendent's council. The students said, hey, our high school does not make us feel comfortable. So they had a voice. That assessment helped change the environment in the way our high school now looks. So now they have a cafe in which the way their cafeteria now looks, the way their senior lounge now looks. And so in the assessments that they're going to be taking, so if I don't understand something on an assessment, we have some educators that are here from Lorain City Schools. If I don't feel comfortable and I need a smaller environment, then they have a voice, right? And so they're using their voice. I don't feel comfortable. So we now have 10 elementary counselors, 3 middle school counselors, 6 high school counselors, and 4 social workers. Students are now able to go and voice their opinion to those people and say, I don't feel comfortable taking the assessments the way I need to take them, or I need to go to a teacher. They know that they have people they can go to and say, hey, I need help. They have a phone line, a hotline. They can go to any of those people and say, we need to take a look at that. We can sit down and do a plan with them and do something about that. Again, we are taking steps to now listen to student voice. You're so welcome.
I also love that you framed surveys as assessment, because that's what they are, right? They provide data that schools can use to improve, and we don't always think about those types of surveys in those terms, but they very much are.
Hi, my name is Spadana Pavluri, and I just completed my first year at Vanderbilt University, and I'm here with the Kentucky Student Voice team. So I attended the highest ranked public school in Kentucky, and have taken a multitude of these tests and was in a super academically rigorous environment. And I just kind of wanted to draw on the mental health component of this, because I found that, I recall just sitting there in these rows of students and opening up that test book and feeling this immense fear and anxiety that if I didn't perform on this, then I was never going to measure up. I was never going to make it into college. I was never going to be considered successful. And so I think that really weighs on students. And at least in the environment I was in, you have students who are dying to get these really, really good test scores. And so, yeah, maybe after a couple of tries, you get that ACT score you'd like. But the environment I was in, it was students were staying up to 2 a.m., memorizing these formulas and studying, and you learn and adopt really, really unhealthy habits. And you're constantly struggling between, do I choose my mental health or do I choose to do good on this test and put in an extra hour of studying? And so I just think amidst all this pressure and this discussion of assessment, how do we encourage students to still develop healthy habits, like even in the wake of that?
That's a great question for you, I think.
Yeah, Spanda, thank you so much for sharing that. There's a story from middle school that comes to mind for me. So there are these map tests that we would take probably like 2 or 3 times a year. And to encourage students to do better, my middle school in our big main hallway created this yellow brick road. And so on like the axis, you can see the different map scores, and then they would put bricks that had number codes, and every student knew what their number code was, and you could see how you compared to every other student in the school and where you fit on the spectrum. And that was supposed to encourage you because you're supposed to try and move up, right? Like I'm supposed to get better. And I think in particular what was so difficult in this middle school is that you had this super affluent gifted program, so all those kids would kind of cluster to one end. And then this was placed in this super low income school without a lot of resources, so all the kids who were districted clustered it towards the other side. And that's not, I think, encouraging good habits, right? You're instilling in kids that that test score was not enough. It's never enough because you can keep moving down the hallway and they want you to keep moving. But also you're seeing, oh, me and my friends can never do as well as those other students. And we're not supposed to do as well as those other students. And so I think we need to change the way we think about what assessment is for. And I know this is something we talked about this morning, is that assessments are not supposed to be for the individual student. But when assessment test scores get back to us, each student is handed an individual slip that said, this is how you did. And this is where everyone else in your district did. And this is where you need to improve. And so if standardized exams, at least coming from the state, from the national level, are not supposed to reflect individual student performance, then I don't know why students are receiving individual slips that tell them how they performed compared to their peers. And if we want students to be collaborative too, that's not how we encourage that. And so I think there just needs to be a bigger emphasis on teaching students to work with each other, and there are ways to assess that and to reward students for collaborating, for developing good habits that I think support their own well-being, versus this kind of rat race where we're not really getting ahead on anything. We're just trying to beat out each other. So I hope that answers your question, Spanda. But I think trying to move more towards collaboration and teamwork versus this very individualized, how do I get ahead of the people around me approach.
Can I speak to that real quick? First, I want to say you're beautiful and you're loved. The second thing I want to say is, in our school district, we are trying to tell our staff we're not worried about test scores. We're not worried about assessments. If we can't take care of the social emotional of our students first, then the learning cannot begin. And that's the bottom line. Okay? And as an educator, that can't happen. If the social emotional can't start first, then the learning can't begin. There's a lot of pressure on kids, and that's when anxiety, that's when suicide, and the other things start to begin, and mental health starts to begin in students. And then that's when we need to pump the brakes and we need to take a step back. Okay? So if anyone has ever been pressured or has felt like that, we're sorry as an educator. Okay? Thank you.
Hello, Ms. AJ. This is Sierra Moan from Lorain County. We heard some really great input from what's going right. I would love to know some of those things that didn't go so right and how you worked through those obstacles for anybody who might be trying to implement the same design that you guys did in Lorain County.
Trial and error. Thanks, Sierra. Trial and error. Everyone has seen Lorain City Schools. We were in state takeover. So those were things that were not right? And we were there for years. And we had to get some things right after some years. And so those were things that were not right. But we have some great and wonderful educators that were out there, and they have done some amazing work. And the ones that have stayed and stayed and stayed, even after so many superintendents or CEOs and different assessments and changes from the state and being told they weren't good enough. Trials and errors. Those are the ones that are there every single day for our students, standing in front of students and the changes. So those are the trials and errors that I'm talking about. Even changes in the superintendent's office or administrational changes, right? So those are the things that were not right. Wow. State takeover was the biggest obstacle. Wow. I think the biggest thing is, I think the biggest thing was the state takeover. That was the biggest one, and being in that for a long time. I think that's the biggest one. Anybody else from Lorraine want to say anything? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. State takeover means when the state says you're not good enough to educate the students in your school district, and they put a person, a CEO, in the place of a superintendent, and they put a plan in place, and the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce Development then puts a plan in place, and they tell you what to do.
And it's even worse than that, because then our administrators are having to answer to these people and try to take care of our people. And it's very hurtful. Even our students were so immensely hurt. In the paper, you get to hear every day how your school system sucks. And the kids know it. They hear it. And so you're going to school. We're going to graduation. And it would hurt my heart. You're at graduation. Oh, we're going to introduce the Academic Distress Commission. I'm at graduation to celebrate my students, because my students are amazing. And you hear that, it hurts. So it's a lot worse, than what you made it sound. Sorry, you're not good enough to educate the students. The ones that we see, the ones that we live, well, no, we don't live with them, but we live around them. We're part of the community, but we're not good enough. No. I just happen to work at a high school, so.
It affects the entire school district, pre-K through 12.
It's extremely disheartening.
Right. I'm from Lorraine, too, and I would say the curriculums that were brought in that weren't during the state takeover, that weren't fully vetted, and they weren't fully, we did not get fully trained on them. And then to come find out later, one of the programs that they implemented and they brought in that people hated because they just dropped it on you, use it, is actually a good program. And when we were doing our ELA adoption, they didn't want to do it because of how it had been. It's got a bad name, and the taste is terrible, but it was a great program, and we're not using it in our district.
Thanks for sharing, because that is accountability as it exists now. So it's important to highlight some of the drawbacks of certain methods, for sure. Any other questions?
Hi. My question is, how have you seen an outcome in the assessment as a direct result of the wraparound services and meeting that hierarchy of needs? Have you seen that in the scores?
I have. As far as students getting to school, students' attendance has gone up. Things being provided for families having more stability. So things are happening for our families, and we are excited for them.
And then I have one more question. It's more of a generalized question, but if we know that the questions on these assessments have bias in them, what is the barrier to changing those questions? Because I feel like I've heard this year after year after year. So what is standing in the way of those questions being changed? That was it.
I mean, we buy these tests from big corporations that don't talk to students or teachers about how to meaningfully design those tests. And they're designed by national corporations. We're not even specifying them by geography. So I think, yeah, how we move forward is designing tests with the students and teachers who are actually in the building about what those students actually should have learned that year.
Hi, I'm from Lorraine. So as a parent, a community advocate, and a business owner in the city of Lorraine, I have two boys, both were in the system during the state takeover, one who has graduated now, another one who's 12 going into 7th grade. I have not seen a difference. I've been to admin, I've been to principals, I've been to the top, and I've gotten nowhere from the superintendent, from the school board, anybody. So now my question is, what do I do? Because now I'm here looking for answers, and this is great for me because I got information to take back to my community. But now that we are here, we know the tests aren't working. We know some of the teachers are great. We know some of them aren't doing their job because they bullied my son. And I've gotten nowhere from the superintendent. So now my question is, where do I go in the system to help my 12-year-old?
So have you gone back to your administrator? So I'm gonna, please, you can approach the mic. So I'm going to, have you gone back to the administrator and worked with your school team and support services?
I've been to the counselor you spoke of in the junior high school. I've been to the superintendent. I've been to the co-superintendent. I've been to everyone. And all I get back is, okay.
So you've worked
we hear you.
You've worked with all it and this.
I've worked with Dr. Graham. I've worked with Sturgill. I've worked with Michael Scott. I've worked with Dara Perry at Longfellow.
Oh, and ma'am, what is your name?
Kenyatta Hawthorne.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
So you've met with a few people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So you've had some private conversations that the rest of the people here are not privileged to.
Correct.
Okay.
I'm not understanding your statement.
So I will jump in here and say, first of all, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Because those are real, your feelings about, your child's experience and your own experience are important. And I want to affirm that to be the case. It sounds like some folks from Lorraine, maybe there's an opportunity here to highlight some avenues for feedback for parents and then maybe take the rest of the conversation offline.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
So what are maybe some channels, as you all understand them, for folks at Lorraine, where parents generally can get involved, can give their feedback? We talked about some of the surveys. When do those happen? I think that would be great to hear.
Can I support that question?
Yes.
So many parents do not know that at the state level, there is an advocacy board. And if you're having any troubles, any type of trouble with any school district or school, you can notify the Family and Community Engagement Department at the state level. Every single school gets state funding through Title I funding. And if a school is not performing or a district is not performing the goals and the supports that they're supposed to provide to families and students, that is another course of action for the state to actually come in and investigate. So if any parent is having any issue with any school district, contact your state board. And especially if there's special ed, there's a special ed advocate that will actually come and sit in the meetings with you to make sure that your IEP plan for your student is actually administered. So you're not at the mercy of the school district. You're not at the mercy of the school. If you're not getting results, contact the state.
Thank you for sharing. And I encourage you all to continue to connect and share those resources. We want to keep the conversation going.
Hello.
We have maybe time for one or two more questions. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Danielle Chivera, and I'm a rising junior in Kentucky, and I'm part of the Kentucky State student. My question is, how do you encourage the leaders in the school to not tell students information that will make them lose hope, and instead they are worrying on how the school will look like on the ranking, ending up putting unnecessary pressure on students, damaging their mental health? Also on these assessments, how do you feel the students feel like knowing that the people making these assessments are not the teachers who are teaching them in class?
So the question, if I'm understanding correctly, how do you ensure that students are not feeling disheartened?
The information from the teachers, like the teacher isn't saying like, you're not gonna pass, or you're not gonna be good enough if you don't.
Right. So question on through how, I think we talked about this morning, how pressure from the top trickles down to teachers, that trickles down to students. So what can, really at any level, whether it's teachers but also students themselves, navigate this sort of pressure that becomes a much bigger deal than I think it should be, this, score that you get? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think Stephanie said it earlier, just having teachers tell the students this doesn't matter, right? Like, I think that's what you were saying, that we have to tell teachers this doesn't matter, and then you have to tell your students it's okay. It's okay. Like, you have to take this because we have to know where you are, but it's a diagnostic. And I don't think a lot of teachers are told that. And I don't think students get told that either, if I'm understanding what you said.
I mean, we have also discussed misconceptions about what a statewide end-of-year assessment is for, right? It's not exactly to inform instruction, but it should tell us how a school is doing. And so I think we need to be more clear about what that score actually tells you and what it's intended to do. One last question.
Okay. Wait, can I just take this out?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this question is particularly for Mrs. Johnson. Stephanie, sorry. So this question is coming from the place of, I'm from Kentucky Student Voice Team, so we value students being heard, students' voices being heard. And like you, I have seen a pattern in your work. And I know that you have said that students in Lorain County, in Lorain City, they have this new program where they can go to people and rely their complaints or their opinions about their school. But we also know that before that happened, students' voices did not get heard in that way, unfortunately. So my question is, what about the students that feel like they have been disheartened in the fact that their voices haven't been heard? So for instance, I'll use myself for an example. Let me tell you guys, I love my high school now, but my middle school, I hated it. They would not pay attention to the students. And I'm not gonna lie, I mean, if I didn't tighten up my 8th grade year, I would not be the Zoe that I am, okay? I would absolutely not be. Because I was, first of all, stressed out because of mental health issues. And second of all, it was I would say stuff and they would constantly ignore me. And I mean, it's okay, I'm a middle schooler, but okay, come on now. I'm literate. I know what I'm talking about and my feelings are valid. And so when finally I left my school, guess what happened? They started listening to students. And so I noticed somebody that I went to school with. Now, she did not get into the best high school, and she unfortunately has some, she didn't reach her full potential because of what happened in middle school. And that is, and I'm sure, I don't live in Ohio, but I'm sure that has happened to a couple of students in Ohio, where because they weren't heard, because the teachers didn't listen to them, because the principals weren't active in their schools, because district people weren't actually in their schools participating and seeing the students for who they are, their past derailed their future into being something great. And so I know that it was a long-winded question, but so yeah, what would you say towards the students who felt like they did not necessarily reach their full potential?
Thank you so much for your question. Actually, that happened a couple of years ago, to where the students were going to stage a walkout at Lorraine High School, and then they were brought to the auditorium. They told the high school principal what they thought of him, and then I had some conversations with some of those young people, right? And so there was a lot of conversation, exactly what you're talking about. So again, it talks about student voice, right? And we have, as adults, we have to take the time to talk and listen, but sometimes adults talk too much, and we have to stop talking and we need to listen. Point blank, period. We need to listen. And like you're saying, sometimes there are some students that are more quieter than others. I myself, I like to just walk the halls of the high school, and sometimes there's some students that don't talk as much, and I like to say, hey, hi, how are you? What's your name? And I like to go and talk to those students, and I like to go visit other buildings, and I like to go check to see what's going on. Because I've been in buildings. I haven't always sat in central office. Okay? We have to listen, and sometimes we also have to watch to see what's going on. We have to give students a space, but sometimes students don't always have to, they have to have an avenue. So whether it's the hotline that we provide, and they can leave something on the hotline, they can leave a message through the email, or they can come right out and come and talk to somebody. So we have to give means and ways for students to be able to talk, that they feel comfortable, or if they want to come with someone. So we have to give opportunities for students. Okay?
We do have time for one last question. I just heard, because I saw somebody approach the mic. I didn't want to cut them off.
Hi, I was really interested to hear from the panelists, and I think Zoe kind of hit on this earlier in the conversation, but if you were the person with all of the power in the world, and you could wave your magic wand, what would be the one thing you would change in our current assessment and accountability system?
That's a lot of power. If I had to pick one thing with assessment and accountability, I think I would just get rid of the standardized nature of accountability. Every student is special, and I think we say that all the time, but we don't assess them that way. They have to take the same tasks as everyone else in the state, right? County by county, state across state, they're taking the same tests and they have to prove the same competencies, but they all want to go and do wildly different things. And I think we were having a conversation with this at the round table. We stifle things out of kids at a young age. If they're doodling in class, they're distracted, stop doing that. If you're humming in class, stop doing that. And then we were surprised when we see kids graduate and they're more disconnected than they've ever been. They don't feel fulfilled in the careers they're going into. They don't know how to make their voice heard. But we were teaching them that for 13 years and assessing them on their ability to conform to what we want them to be. And so I think if I could wave my wand, and we would have individualized learning plans for every student. And that's working with them, working with their parents, working with the community, and working with teachers who are watching them learn to figure out how do we look at the student and say, this is where you're excelling, not this is where you're falling short, this is how you're not performing where other students should be, but this is where you're shining, and let's figure out a way to nurture that. And that's what academic success should look like. That's what graduation requirements should be built around, is how do you succeed based on what we know you can do.
Does either of you want to add to that?
I would add one thing is that I want whatever the concrete actions would be, I would hope that we can take the punitive sense out of the accountability system. And we've heard multiple people mentioning the mental health burden and issues that have been put on students. And actually, this has nothing to do with the students. It's about the adults that are in the building, that are operating the system, and their job of serving the students. That's what it's all about. It's about people doing their job to serve the student, to make them successful in the way that they hope to be. And I think, making the whole accountability and assessment conversations more about driving resources to schools that needed the help is more important than labeling schools and naming schools different things. And I think that's, giving them help and support is really what's most valuable for of the system.
So if I were able to wave a magic wand, I would just wave it to say that education was created with a history of marginalization from the beginning. It was not created for Black and brown people from the beginning. And then the assessments were not created for Black and brown people from the beginning. And so if I could wave a magic wand, then it would all just go away. But I know that I can't do that. So we have to put things in perspective. So then we have to go and put people in places in order to get our people in the right place, to change the assessments and to change the system, right? And then we have to make sure that our students and our parent voices are heard. Ms. Hawthorne, I'm sorry that you don't feel that your voice is not being heard. I don't have a problem staying afterwards and talking to you. I'm all about people talking. Hey, I can talk to you after. But that goes for anybody. I'm always talking to parents all day long. But we have to realize who the system was created for. And if we understand that, then we can get rid of how the system was created and disrupt the system.
I think there's no better place to end than there. So I want to thank you for being on our panel. So please go ahead and thank our panelists. And also a big thank you to you all for participating and offering your questions. That is really the point of this event, is to put folks in a room who are not necessarily always talking to each other, to share perspectives and maybe broaden our perspective.